Example 28, show that the head loss in the jump of a very wide channel or rectangular channel is given by head loss in the jump, quantity depth after the jump minus depth before the jump cube over 4 depth before and depth after for d1, d2. So that's the formula. Let's begin with head loss in the jump, which is specific energy at before the jump minus specific energy after the jump. I hope you can recall that. Specific energy at 1 minus specific energy at 2. Then V1 is Q over D1 and V2 equals Q over depth sub 2. D sub 1 times 1 or 1 meter times D1. That's the area per unit width. So V1 square is Q square over D1 square. So head loss in the jump is we replace V1 square by Q square over D1 square. This is now this one over 2G plus depth 1 then minus Q square over 2G then V2 square is Q square over this depth sub 2 square plus D sub 2. This, the common to this is Q square over 2G. So factor out. So Q square over G rather over 1 over 2D1 square minus 1 over 2D sub 2 square. Then plus minus quantity because D sub 2 is negative. So let's write it first D sub 2. D sub 1 is positive, so minus D sub 1. Simplify inside. So take note that Q square over G is depth 1, depth 2 over 2, depth 1 plus depth 2 from hydraulic jump formula for rectangular sections. Remember, Q square over G is depth 1, depth 2 over 2, quantity depth 1 plus depth 2. So we just replace that by this quantity here. Then common to these two terms is 1/2. Then we have D sub 2 square minus D sub 1 square all over D1 square D sub 2 square, which is this, algebra. Then minus quantity depth 2 minus depth 1. Then we can cancel depth 1, depth 2. This is this. So this becomes depth 1, depth 2 over 4 depth 1, depth 2 times quantity depth 2 square minus depth 1 square minus depth 2 minus depth 1. So head loss in the jump is depth 1 plus depth 2 over 4 depth 1 depth 2. Then quantity depth 2 minus depth 1. We factor out depth 2 square minus depth 1 square into depth 2 minus depth 1, depth 2 plus depth 1. Then we just copy. So common depth 2 minus depth 1. Let's factor that out. Head loss in the jump is depth 2 minus depth 1 over 4d1 d2 quantity depth 1 plus depth 2 quantity square because we have depth 1 plus depth 2 quantity square. Then minus 4 times depth 2 depth 1 because we also factor out 4 here, the denominator. So if you distribute, that will give us same result, depth 2 minus depth 1 for the second term. Then let's expand inside here. So we have head loss in the jump, depth 2 minus depth 1 over 4 depth 1 depth 2. Quantity depth 1 square plus 2 depth 1 depth 2 plus depth 2 square minus 4 depth 1 depth 2. Simplifying inside, combine like terms. So we have head loss in the jump, depth 2 minus depth 1 over 4 depth 1 depth 2 quantity depth 1 square minus 2 depth 1 depth 2 plus depth 2 square. So this is a perfect square trinomial. The factors are depth 2 minus depth 1 quantity square. So head loss in the jump is quantity depth 2 minus depth 1 over 4 depth 1 depth 2 quantity depth 2 minus depth 1 quantity square. So finally, we now have shown that this is really the head loss in the jump for a rectangular channel. So head loss in the jump is quantity depth 2 minus depth 1 quantity cube over 4 depth 1 depth 2. So that's the direct formula if the depths before and after the jump are known for a rectangular channel.